All right, so I am, really sorry I have to jump into some really, I'm sure, great conversations happening after such a rich morning. All people want to do right now is talk about that last Faith and Culture panel, reflect on the business panel, and can we just give the panelists and the moderators one more round of applause, please? The person I want to introduce, who's actually going to introduce the Attorney General, is just an incredible person. He's a person that I've had the real honor to get to know over the last few years. And in those last few years, he has defeated a lot of really, really terrible things. First of all, he defeated 4 people who took it upon themselves to release a list of 1,300 names that they alleged were undocumented. Then he defeated cancer. Then he defeated anti-immigrant legislation moving through the state of Utah. And then he single-handedly, I would say, has played such a critical role in defeating the tide of anti-immigrant legislation rhetoric across the country. And he's just become a great friend of immigrants and immigration across the nation. And I should also say just last week, he intervened on behalf of 2 young undocumented students in the state of Utah who were about to be deported. And he himself personally, as the chief law enforcement officer for the state of Utah, weighed in with the Department of Homeland Security and said, you know what? If you want to enforce immigration law, if you want to go after the bad guys, you should be doing that. You should be spending your time and money going after the bad guys, not these 2 students who are doing incredible things in their community, who will do incredible things in our country. And so this person is Mark Shurtleff, and I've introduced him a couple of times now, and I still haven't quite figured out a way to build up to the right crescendo, other than say, thank you, Mark. You're a great friend.
All right, thank you, Ali. Hey, Ali, I just have to return the compliment. Hey, got involved in the state of Utah several years ago with this idea about forming the Utah Compact and a way to have a response to 1070 type enforcement-only legislation. We knew that we couldn't just say no to that. We had to have alternatives. And the National Immigration Forum, all the staff put this thing together, did that, and then we started thinking big. We were talking about America's Compact after Utah Compact, then realized America's Compact won't do any good if Congress is yet unwilling to take action on this. So go back to the states, the laboratories of democracy, and state by state, and he came up with this great idea of let's have these summits, these regional conferences or summits. And we started in Utah. First go around, it was nice. This is like what we did in Utah on steroids. I have to congratulate you here in Georgia for really stepping up and doing an extraordinary job here in National Immigration Forum for their leadership. And so give a hand to them. And it takes a lot of work to put something like this together, and money, frankly, to do that. So thank you. It is my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce a former United States Attorney General. I have been serving as Utah Attorney General since January 2001. I've worked with a number of attorneys general. I'm very pleased to have met Attorney General Gonzales in 2007. Was always open, always came to our Attorney General meeting, let us work with the Department of Justice, how important that is to have federal, state, local relationships work. And it was an honor to work with you, Attorney General Gonzales, while you were in office, and it's my distinct pleasure to introduce you here today and tell you a little bit more about him. He said that I can say anything I want, just keep it short. I will say this, and maybe this is an ironic play on words, but I will say that he was raised in humble circumstances. Literally, he was raised in Humble, Texas, having been born in San Antonio. When I say humble, to rise from a dad who had a second-grade education, was a migrant worker and then in construction, his mother with a sixth-grade education, Maria, who raised 8 children in a 2-bedroom home in Texas, to rise to become the first Hispanic Attorney General, and to this date, the highest-ranking Hispanic in the United States federal government in history. That's saying something about how he was raised, how he was brought up, and I think an honor to his parents, Pablo and Maria. So he, having been raised in those circumstances, education was always stressed to him and his siblings, so he became an honor student in high school, went on to the Air Force Academy for a while and served in the United States Air Force. I served in the Navy. My dad was Army, but Air Force is also a good branch to serve in. But I understand that as a kid, he used to go sell snacks and so forth at the Rice University football games, and I always wanted to go there, and that's where he ended up graduating with a bachelor's in political science and then on to Harvard Law School, where he succeeded and came back to Texas and went into private practice for a decade or so, gained the notice of the governor, Governor Bush in Texas, and the first Governor Bush in Texas became his general counsel, which I know the role of general counsel is so important, having worked as Attorney General for many years with general counsel for our various governors in Utah. And from there decided he wanted to himself take on this opportunity of public service and ran and won for Secretary of State of Texas. And then because of his love for the law, the importance of justice in his mind, he decided to run for Supreme Court in the state of Texas and was elected as a Supreme Court justice. And of course, when Governor Bush became President Bush, and he knew of the talent, expertise, and the absolute commitment to public service of this man, he brought him over to the White House and then ultimately appointed him as the 80th Attorney General of the United States of America. Having served there, I want to tell you a little bit more about the kind of heart he has. I know. They said I had 2 minutes. We're almost done here. He spent a lot of his time, you don't know about these things, but with great organizations like United Way, Big Brothers Big Sisters, Catholic Charities. More recently, he's, moved to Nashville, and we have a lot of you from Tennessee here, where he is the Doyle Rogers Chair for the Belmont University College of Law, and more recently has joined a firm of counsel with a good friend of mine, the former Attorney General of Tennessee, Paul Summers, and he's there now of counsel with that Nashville law firm. Of course, in high demand around the country for his expertise and experience and what he can share. We're very fortunate to have him here today, speaking out on the importance of immigration reform. And with that, please give a hearty welcome to Justice, I like to call him, Justice Alberto Gonzales.
Thank you. Whenever I ask someone who visits the White House for the first time, what made the greatest impression? And some say the Oval Office, of course. Others the Rose Garden. But most visitors confess it's watching the arrival and departure of the President's helicopter, Marine One. You can hear it approach from a distance, but you really can't see it, even from the South Lawn, because of the trees, until it appears suddenly just above the Washington Monument as it glides toward a landing on the South Lawn. And the noise is deafening. You can hear it from every corner of the 18-acre compound. On normal occasions, there is a lucky group of visitors to witness the presidential movement and a bank of news cameras and reporters to capture historic moments. But on the evening of September 11, 2001, the scene was different. The South Lawn was deserted except for a camera crew and a circle of agents in black uniforms with machine guns forming this protective perimeter as the president returned home that historic day. And I stood on the Oval Office portico and watched as Marine One landed and greeted him. And we began the work of responding to the attacks of that morning. Now, because I worked in the White House on 9/11, I carry the memory of that day and a wound that is personal for all of us who worked in the White House during that period. And 10 years have passed, and this nation, fortunately, has not experienced another successful attack of that scale. And with the passage of time, our memories of that day grow fainter. And I know some Americans are even sick of hearing about the war on terror. But it is the reality, the new reality of our way of life. And undoubtedly, we're safer today than we were a decade ago. But we're not yet safe. And in response to the 9/11 attacks, our government implemented many measures to stop terrorists from hijacking airplanes and using them as missiles. And our enemy responded, because they're smart, by changing tactics, including the attempted use of sneaker and underwear bombs. The next attack is likely to come from a lone wolf, a single individual, indoctrinated and trained over the Internet. He or she may speak perfect English and look like you, look like me. He is likely already within our borders, likely to be an American citizen or a lawful resident of this country with a legal right to come and go as she pleases. The only similarity between tomorrow's terrorists and the September 11th attackers may be their disdain for our values, our respect for life, and our respect for the rule of law. Our government has spent millions of dollars securing the different modes of transportation in our country, but we cannot have true security if we do not secure our borders. And this requires an effective, comprehensive immigration policy. Now, admittedly, security on our border with Mexico has improved in the past decade, but it remains inadequate in a post-9/11 world when we should know who is in this country and why. Border security against gang members and drug traffickers has also been elusive, and we have failed at a spectacular level in preventing the illegal flow of guns from the United States into Mexico. Those who resist tougher border security measures point to recent numbers that indicate illegal immigration has slowed dramatically recently. Some argue it has actually declined. And they claim that there is no proof that foreign terrorists want to use our southern border as a gateway into the United States. The real threat, they say, is from people already in America, as I just described. Even so, we cannot discount the vulnerability of our southern border. During my first visit to Mexico as Attorney General in 2005, I met with top Mexican intelligence and law enforcement officials, and they confessed to me that their nightmare scenario was a member of al-Qaeda crossing illegally from Mexico into the United States and orchestrating another 9/11 type attack. They believed that such an event would affect dramatically the relationship between our two countries, forcing the United States to take protective measures restricting travel and trade, steps that would hurt the Mexican economy. I'm not suggesting that immigrants crossing illegally into the United States are terrorists. I am saying Mexican officials worry about border security, and our government should as well. Like most Americans, I am a descendant of immigrants and a grateful beneficiary of the opportunities available to our nation's citizens. My grandparents immigrated from Mexico in the early 20th century seeking a better life, and they found it working in the fields and farms of Texas. Diversity is one of the great strengths of the United States, diversity by the migration of ethnicities, culture, and ideas. But as you've heard from others this morning, there's almost universal agreement that our immigration process is broken and that our immigration strategy is at best outdated and at worst ineffective. Every sovereign nation has the authority to determine who can be a citizen and who can lawfully be present within its borders. Today, many Americans believe our federal government has abandoned that responsibility. Now, achieving the right immigration policy is hard. It's really hard because it impacts families, our foreign policy, national security, our economy. It affects the very essence of who we are as a country. And as indicated earlier by Rick, President Bush understood the responsibility of the federal government to address this challenge. But he was unsuccessful persuading a Republican-controlled Congress to do its job. And so today, confronted with a president and Congress either unwilling or unable to act, there are state leaders around the country introducing laws that require, among other things, state and local law enforcement to enforce federal immigration law, require service providers to maintain records of the cost of services provided to undocumented immigrants, and I could go on and on. Many of these proposals will not become law. Of those that have, most have been challenged in the courts. As we all know, Obama administration officials went to court to stop Arizona from enforcing SB 1070, arguing that the Constitution gives the federal government sole authority in this area. How the courts ultimately decide this question and other challenges to other state action is unclear. We will soon find out. But with the federal government's claim of authority comes responsibility, and thus far our national leaders have failed us. Recently, some have suggested we deal with this by amending the 14th Amendment of our Constitution, which says all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. Proponents want to discourage undocumented mothers from crossing our borders to give birth to children referred to as anchor babies, but who are by law American citizens. I do not support such an amendment. Based on principles from my tenure as a judge, I think we should reserve constitutional amendments for extraordinary circumstances that we cannot address effectively through legislation or regulation. Passing an amendment, as we all know, is difficult, However, even if we could be successful in passing an amendment, it would not solve our immigration problem because most undocumented immigrants come here primarily to provide for themselves and their families, not to become U.S. citizens. As the former nation's chief law enforcement officer and as a citizen who believes in the rule of law, I cannot condone anyone coming into this country unlawfully. However, as a father who wants the best for my own children, I understand why these parents risk coming to America, especially when there is little fear of prosecution. If we want to stop this practice, we should pass and enforce comprehensive immigration legislation rather than trying to amend our Constitution. So, what should our policy look like? Let me give you some thoughts. First, it would not be amnesty or otherwise reward those who broke our laws. We are a nation of laws. When people fail to follow the law with impunity, it encourages further disobedience and breeds disrespect for the rule of law. And that's not America. Second, our plan must be practical, it's got to be enforceable, and capable of effective implementation without enormous delays or avoidable errors. It must be fair also to those who follow the rules and have followed the rules. We have to secure our borders in a way consistent with our national security. Where appropriate, we should accelerate the use of more border agents and support them as necessary with the National Guard. I don't believe in a 3,000-mile fence. It's ridiculous. Instead, we should use limited fencing where it makes sense. Take advantage of the natural border terrain where it can serve as a barrier. And supplement this with the most sophisticated advanced technology that we can use. Our policy should reinforce respect for the law through effective enforcement, including tougher penalties on employers who hire undocumented workers. In order to encourage employers, however, to grow their businesses and to hire, we should provide a safe harbor by streamlining the issuance to workers of picture ID cards by the Department of Homeland Security so that employers can hire without fear of prosecution. Our immigration policy should also complement our national economic policy and promote commerce. By most accounts, undocumented immigrants contribute to our economy. Legal migration improves productivity, increases average income for native U.S. citizens, and a growing economy increases available jobs sufficient to ensure that native U.S. citizen employees are not displaced. Therefore, an immigration policy that encourages immigrants to come to the United States lawfully is going to contribute to our economy. The reality is there are some jobs American citizens do not want. There are some skilled jobs for which Americans are simply not available. Our policy should include a more robust temporary worker program that attracts both targeted skilled and unskilled workers who can be placed into a temporary legal status to sustain our economy. Congress will have to decide how long these workers can work, qualifications, how much they will pay in taxes, and how often and for how long they will have to return to their home country. Now, as we make progress securing our southern border, we must deal with the millions of undocumented immigrants already here. And the numbers swell from 10 million to 15 to 20 million people. Let me be clear. Our government is incapable of forcibly removing millions of people. We talked about this in the Bush White House, and we concluded it can't be done. There's no way. No way to make that happen. And even if we were successful in doing so, it would cripple our economy. It would devastate certain service industries, farming, and construction. Instead, we need to bring those here unlawfully out of the shadows. Those who qualify can remain in the U.S. under this temporary worker program. Congress will have to set priorities and determine what to do with special categories, such as the elderly, who have been here a long time and are now unable to work and provide for themselves. Not everyone should be allowed to remain. If you're a criminal or a national security threat, then you cannot stay in this country. It is estimated that perhaps up to half of those now here illegally first came into our country legally under a now expired work or student visa. I know the government has been trying hard to deal with this, but we need to do a better job using technology and intelligence to track those here on visas and work more closely with home countries to help us identify and locate visa overstayers. Going forward, those who overstay their visas should be subject to substantial fines and be ineligible for future legal status in America. As I said earlier, I believe most undocumented adult immigrants come to the United States to earn a living and provide for a family. While some may dream of becoming a U.S. citizen someday, most would be content, I believe, to be placed in some form of legal status, even if just a short period, in order to work and provide for themselves and their families. However, for those seeking a more permanent path, I have no major policy objection if Congress elects to provide a pathway to citizenship to those who earn it, meaning they pay, and this was discussed in the last panel, some kind of penalty as an admission of wrongdoing, have no criminal record, are employed or have some other means of financial support, have established roots in the community, otherwise qualify for citizenship, and are not given an advantage over those who follow the rules in pursuing legal status. Some will claim that this is amnesty. I disagree. As one of the panelists said earlier, amnesty is defined as an act of a government authority by which a pardon is granted to a large group of individuals, and pardon is defined as the excusing of an offense without exacting a penalty. I know that there are some who believe anything short of mass deportation is amnesty. But by definition, what I propose, what others have been talking about, does not constitute amnesty because it includes a penalty and other conditions. Other critics may argue that bestowing legal status upon lawbreakers will encourage further illegal immigration. I again respectfully disagree. If the legislation granting earned legalization also requires secure borders, tougher workplace enforcement, a streamlined deportation process, and includes an eligibility date that cannot be met by foreigners not already here, then I believe we can do this and not encourage further unlawful migration. We must also decide the fate of immigrant children brought unlawfully to this country through no fault of their own by their parents and raised in the United States, the only home they've ever known. My sense of fairness tells me we should not penalize these children for the sins of their parents. However, my sense of justice tells me that we do not want the parents to benefit from those very sins. I'm in favor of comprehensive federal legislation that gives these children an opportunity to seek legal status, to pursue earned legalization. Now, variations of the plan are well known and have been discussed publicly. At a minimum, I think the law should benefit only those children brought into the country before bill enactment to discourage further unlawful migration and who graduate from high school or earn a GED. These children would be eligible to apply for special provisional legal status that would require them to meet conditions established by Congress, such as graduating from a 2-year community college, completing at least 2 years toward a 4-year degree, or serving 2 years in the military. And after a reasonable period, those of proven moral character and otherwise eligible for citizenship could apply for lawful permanent resident status. I am not committed to a specific plan or timetable. That will be up for Congress. I simply want our government to provide relief to deserving and qualified children. The current policies of the U.S. government favors lawful permanent residents seek citizenship once eligible. There are no compelling reasons that I can think of to deny these immigrant children the same opportunity once they become lawful permanent residents. Now, you probably have seen or heard media speculation of a bipartisan legislative proposal to deal with these children. It is my understanding that in order to attract sufficient votes in the Congress for passage, the legislation will not provide a pathway to citizenship. Again, I defer to Congress. However, it seems to me that the individuals who qualify under this legislation will be sons and daughters who are college educated or have served our country in the military or both. These are precisely the type of individuals we should all want as fellow citizens. If the proposed legislation does not provide a pathway to citizenship, it is my belief that down the road, someday, we will have to revisit again the question of their citizenship. It is inevitable. And I think it's simply a question of timing for the Congress to decide, do we address it now or do we deal with it later? If we decide to provide a pathway now to citizenship, an extended wait and a higher filing fee is appropriate in fairness to children whose parents did follow the law in seeking legal status for themselves and their children. Furthermore, Congress should impose additional restrictions, such as prohibiting these lawful permanent residents from filing a petition for legal status for any family member other than a subsequent acquired spouse and minor children. And this would address a concern that by providing legal status to these immigrant children, we do not provide pathways to the legal status for the parents who came into this country unlawfully. Now, these are some broad principles and measures for an immigration policy that I think will work. It is a starting point, a place to begin the discussion, and that's why these kind of events are so important. We need to be talking about this issue. They're very, very difficult, very, very complicated, and the more we talk about it, I think the more progress we make. The devil, as they say, is in the details, but that is why you elect people to go to Washington, to deal with complicated, politically sensitive, tough issues. Polls show today that Americans are more concerned about the economy and the deficit than they are about border or national security. I understand the desire for economic security. As a young boy, I watched my mother and father divide the bills at the end of each week to decide, okay, which ones are we going to pay this week? However, if we as a nation deal with immigration in an intelligent manner, our new policies will help our economy and our national security. Now, much of what I just discussed is not new. Perhaps how we talk about it going forward will be. I urge that we tone down the rhetoric. My friends on the left, many here in this room, need to acknowledge that not all government action is anti-immigrant or anti-Hispanic. My friends on the right need to remind themselves that a great majority of undocumented immigrants come here simply to find a better life, just like our ancestors. They contribute to our society, and they're otherwise law-abiders. They're human beings, most with young families. Some in the Hispanic community speculate the harsh rhetoric and the state actions that I referred to earlier reflect fear. And the previous panel talked a little bit about the fear, a reaction from a concern by some Americans they are losing their country, saying goodbye to a way of life. And there may be some truth to that. I mean, the demographics show tremendous Hispanic growth. Hispanics represent the future workforce, future voters, future leaders of this region and of this country. However, fear of change is only half the story from my perspective. I think to the extent that there may be fear for many people, it is fear that our country may be changing without planning or control, without careful deliberation by our leaders as to a migration policy that supports our economic and our national security interests. All Americans, irrespective of our skin color, should fear this. We cannot afford a patchwork network of state laws governing immigration. It is time for our federal officials to step up and do the job that we elected them to do. And the political party responsible for delivering comprehensive immigration reform and getting it done in a civil tone is going to win the hearts and minds of Hispanic American voters and quite likely control American politics in 2012 and well beyond that. Now, I'm going to close with some remarks with a quote by noted physicist Albert Einstein that I use when I speak, who said there are only two ways to live your life. One is as though nothing is a miracle. The other is as though everything is a miracle. And I choose to live my life believing the latter. As was noted in my introduction, my mother and father met working in the West Texas fields as young migrant workers. And I look back, I remember the days when I was a boy and played next to the lot where my father and uncles built the small two-bedroom house that I grew up in with 7 brothers and sisters. And my mother lives there still today. And we had no hot running water the entire time I lived at home, no telephone until I was a junior in high school. And every morning, my mother, when I was a small boy, my mother would wake me up at dawn to make so I could have breakfast with my dad. And we'd always have the same thing, eggs and tortillas. And she'd be in the kitchen making the same lunch, beans and tortillas for my dad. And she dutifully put them in the tortillas in a brown paper lunch sack. And I can recall me running outside waving goodbye to my dad as he would catch a ride because we didn't have a car, catch a ride to a construction site. But we did that. This was a daily ritual. And several years ago when I was working in the White House, my mother came to visit me in Washington. And we toured the monuments and we visited the museums like all the other tourists. But I also took her into the Oval Office to see the president. You see, it was important for me to do this for her, this shy little woman about 4 feet nothing, to show her what I had accomplished because of her sacrifices and the sacrifices of my father. And at dawn on the last day of her visit, she was up to make breakfast for me just as she had done every morning for my father before he left for work. Only I wasn't going to a construction site wearing a hard hat. I had my suit on. And I was reporting to work at the White House to advise the most powerful person in the world. Now think of the wonder that must have filled her heart. She never dreamed of this miracle, that I would take her from the cotton fields to the Oval Office. I am the son of a Mexican carpenter and cotton picker. My father did not go to school beyond the second grade, and yet I served as the Attorney General of the United States. We live in a country where dreams still can and do come true. And for this and many other reasons, America is worth fighting for. America is worth dying for. You've honored me by your invitation to be with you today. This is a very important topic. I believe in God's goodness, and every day I see His grace in my life and on our country. In your work and in your home, in this endeavor, I pray that God shows you the miracles He's already provided. I pray that God watches over you and your families. May He bless this community, and may He continue to bless the greatest country on the face of the earth, the United States of America. Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, thank you, General Gonzales, Justice Gonzales, Alberto, our friend. Thank you very much. If you have questions, please, same thing, if you'll write them down, raise your hand right now. Cardo will come by and pick them up. You kind of answered this, so while we're doing that, let me just ask a question, and then please get your questions ready. I recently had a chance to meet with Juan Hernandez and Jeb Bush and others who are Republican Hispanic Association of Texas and others. Talked to Marco Rubio and others within the Republican Party. And we don't want to make this partisan other than the fact that much of this harsh enforcement-only legislation has been brought by Republicans around the country. You were obviously involved, or at least connected with the Bush White House and how important the Hispanic vote was for the Bush administration. What do you see? Do you think that Marco Rubio and others are on the right track as far as formulating a different national Republican kind of agenda with regard to immigration reform and how that might affect future?
It's hard for me to answer that question in that I don't know Marco Rubio. I don't think I've ever met him. I don't know Governor Romney. I have met him, but I just don't know him that well. So I don't know. I don't know how important this issue is for them beyond understanding that they need to get Hispanic votes in order to get elected in November. I hope it's much more than that. I hope it is a sincere effort, sincere understanding that the future of our country really depends on how we deal with this issue and other issues that are important to the Hispanic community. It is true. I think that this Republican Party, again, and not to make this partisan, has done a terrible job talking about this issue in a way that's very anti-Hispanic, quite honest, anti-immigrant. And I think that's very, very unfortunate. And whether or not Governor Romney can recover from that just remains to be seen. Obviously, President Obama has his own issues. He promised that comprehensive immigration reform during the early part of his administration, and he failed to deliver on that. So as I travel around the country, there are many Hispanics who are disappointed in the president. But by and large, as I've stated before to the media, I think it's still early for a lot of Hispanic families. They're worried about putting food on their table, and I don't think they're focused on the election yet. I think as we get closer, Hispanics, like all Americans, are going to simply ask themselves, okay, who am I better off today, and who represents the best opportunity for a better future for me and my family? And they're going to make that judgment as we get closer to Election Day. But this is an important issue, and while I think for Hispanics, education and the economy and jobs are probably more important than immigration, I think this is something that both campaigns need to be thinking about.
All right, thank you. Let me go back to this is a good question because you talked, obviously, with great affection for your family and your heritage. And this question has to do with really just kind of a personal feeling, how you would feel if by law you could not help legalize or a process of legalizing your grandparents or any who may have had undocumented status at some point in your family's history.
If I couldn't help them?
Yeah, if you couldn't help them, what
help them how? I mean,
help them trying to attain that
help them
recognition.
Become legal, lawful?
Yeah.
Was a lawyer, I'd be terribly offended. No, I understand. I understand the American dream. I've lived it, and I understand people wanting to also achieve the American dream. And People, they die coming to this country, and I understand and I fully support the notion of people wanting to become American citizens, but it's like every country, we should have control over who is in this country and why they're here. I think we are a great country. We are a unique country because of our diversity. And I think too many people lose sight of that fact. We are great because of our diversity, and we should honor that diversity, and we should continue that diversity as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you. Here's just in general, what more can be done to help more Latinos register and to vote and to run for office and to participate in our process?
Well, it's not a problem just unique to Latinos, Hispanics. When I was Secretary of State, one of my responsibilities in Texas was try to encourage Texans to vote. People simply don't care. It's sad to say, but it's true. Too many people choose not to vote on Election Day. Now, I think candidates and campaigns bear some responsibility. I think as a candidate, your job is to energize them, give people a reason to vote for you, no question about it. I think in our community, many people, certainly older Hispanics, may come from countries where they're suspicious of the government. They don't want to go register. They may believe it's too hard, too inconvenient. One of the issues that many states are debating right now is voter IDs to vote. I happen to support it. I don't support its use in terms of intimidation or discouraging people from voting. But listen, you can't function, you can't live in this society as an American, as a citizen, if you don't have voter identification. It's just the way it is. And so it may be a little inconvenient to get it, but I try to tell Hispanics, get it. I mean, if it means that you can participate, if you can participate on Election Day, it's a one day of the year where you're equal to anybody else. No matter your skin color, your last name, your zip code, you have the same power as everyone else. And so take advantage of that and get, I think that's important.
In fact, I would add our efforts is that there are so many others who are apathetic in our country who aren't voting, particularly in primary races around the country, that the more you get involved, the more opportunity you have to have a voice where you may be a minority. In Utah, for example, maybe 10% of the citizens will vote in a primary election.
Right. I think, and so obviously people look at the demographics of the Hispanic community. The key is whether or not we're going to come out and vote. That's going to be the big issue. Will we come out and vote, particularly in key battleground states? And we'll just have to wait and see.
Okay, thank you. There's, speaking of Senator Rubio and some talk about a potential different type of DREAM Act. In Utah, we passed in-state tuition many years ago, hoping that there would be the next step in a federal DREAM Act, and we still have that in-state tuition in Utah. But question from someone here is that under existing law, do you feel President Obama has executive authority to deal with DREAM Act students?
Do I think he has executive
authority? Is that something that really is left to Congress to do?
I suspect that if President Obama believed he had executive authority, he would have taken advantage of it, quite frankly. And certainly, you're always better off in relying upon legislation because an executive order can be undone, through an act of Congress. And so, what we should hope for, is comprehensive immigration legislation, not a comprehensive immigration executive order. That doesn't make it. That's not enough. We need to have legislation to deal with this issue. It is so complicated. The truth of the matter is, I don't think you want the White House making some very important policy decisions on this issue. You need to have the consensus. You need to have the input from the members of Congress.
What about starting with thousands of individuals that have a status of, quote, pending, as far as immigration reform, pending for several years, even when they fulfill all the requirements coming here legally? There's some way to move that along.
Well, I do think, I don't know how many of you have spent time reading through our immigration laws, but I don't understand it. I'll be honest with you. It's confusing. It's contradictory within itself. It's a hodgepodge, quite frankly, of rules and regulations and laws. And so one of the things that I did not include in my speech, although I often do, is that while we're at it, while we're looking at comprehensive immigration reform, we ought to just start over and write a coherent set of laws based upon an agreed-upon set of principles to deal with immigration. And it needs to be easier to understand. I mean, the average citizen The average citizen should be able to understand the laws that are passed by Congress, and there's no way to that's true in this case.
Well, with that, great way to end. We really appreciate your service to our country, your ongoing service on this issue, and your leadership voice on the issue of immigration reform. So
Thank you
again,
so
thank
much
you
for
very
having
much
me.
for being here.
Let's take a 5-minute break, get the next panel up here, last cup of coffee. One more panel, then we all hop on the road or to the airport. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, could I ask you to please take your seats as soon as you're finished taking pictures with This is a law enforcement panel. In a minute, I'm going to make them stand up and turn on lights and siren here or something. Couple minutes, please. Ask you to please take your seats so we can move on to the next panel. Thank you very much. It's been a wonderful day, very educational. Appreciate all those who participated. I personally have been looking forward to this panel because 14 years in elected office, it's been the greatest honor of my life, and I think forever will be, to work with the men and women in law enforcement. One thing as Attorney General, when I took office in early 2001, didn't think that I would be doing, and that is attending the funeral of 14 police officers in Utah killed in the line of duty. These men and women are out there serving every single day, and it's interesting that we have this chance now today to hear from two longtime, lifetime members of law enforcement who are going to talk about the role and impact that these laws that are being passed have on our responsibilities to protect and serve everybody in our communities. So it's a great honor and respect that I get to introduce our two panelists here today and then engage in them with some questions and to answer your questions. So again, while they're talking, if you'll get your questions ready and make sure you just raise your hand and pass them out to Carter or somebody here, and we'll make sure we get those questions prepared. The first question I maybe ask all of you is, one of these gentlemen was born in Mexico. You know, in law enforcement, we're often accused of profiling. Well, let me have you. Would you profile these two gentlemen? It's not what you think. Let me first, to my immediate right, Chief Larry Godwin, a Tennessee Deputy Commissioner of Safety and a former Memphis Chief of Police. He served in Memphis law enforcement for, it says over 30, I think it's closer to 40 years, 37 years. You don't look like you could have been in the law enforcement for that long, Chief, but appreciate your service there, and more recently, as I say, is now the Chief of Police, or Deputy Commissioner in the Tennessee Department of Public Safety. He's president of the Memphis Police Foundation. He has received many awards for his service, which includes the 2005 Veterans of Foreign War for having served in the United States Marine Corps, tour duty in Vietnam. God bless you. Thank you for your service. I was Navy. We took you where you needed to go. Appreciate the job you did for us once you got there. He was also the 2008 Tennessee Association of Chiefs of Police President's Award, among other accolades, and really appreciate you being here today, Chief. We also have Chief John King of Dorisville, Georgia, who habla español and nació en Mexico. I guess down there they call you Rey, all right? Or Jefe or Rey. John King served as the Chief of Police of the city of Dorisville since October 2002. Most of his career was right here in Atlanta. Since 1985, I guess he began as a recruit there in Atlanta PD, where he served in many capacities and did serve on a number of strike forces, worked closely with the FBI and the DEA as part of his service, and knows the importance of federal, state, local relationships when it comes to law enforcement and public safety. He has, obviously, because he's bilingual and fluent, he has really worked hard at establishing bilingual services within law enforcement and for the residents of Dorisville. He's also received numerous awards, also served in the United States military as Army Colonel, and has, in fact, are you still in the reserve? Has recently, in fact, led operations in Afghanistan and Iraq, and has received not only a Bronze Star and a CIB Combat Infantry badge for his service there, but also a Blue Star, which is equivalent of a Purple Star, a Blue Star for being injured in line of duty as a police officer. Gentlemen, thank you for your service. Give them a hand and please welcome them to our panel. Did you have some opening statements you want to make before we get to questions? Or why don't you, just talk a little bit about why you're here.
I take it this is working okay. First of all, I was not born in Mexico. I guess you got that. Secondly, I was listening earlier today and was talking about first generation, second generation, your grandparents coming in to Ellis Island. My grandparents immigrated over here from Italy. And no, I cannot speak Italian. I guess I'm a third generation that said to heck with that. I sat there in the living room with the sound turned off as my grandparents watched TV. They could not speak English, so they didn't want it on, and I would sit there as a child until I just got bored to death and walk off. And that was after it took a while to get that TV. But I got to tell you, I'm working on 40 years, I guess, getting close in law enforcement. I'm here with some of my great colleagues from Tennessee, and Chief Rouse and Chrisman and Maggie, our TACP Executive Director. It is just truly an honor for me to be here, to sit here with Chief King, to be part of this, to tell you some of the things we maybe did in Memphis in reaching out into the community, and some of the things we do in the state of Tennessee. And right now, talking with Chief King, we're in a pretty good situation compared to others. And it's just truly a privilege for me to be here today, and just great presentation so far. And we'll try to live up to that. So here you go, Chief.
Well, thank you. It's an absolute honor to be here. And yes, yo soy mexicano y nací, crecí en México hasta que tenía 18 años. So imagine the thoughts that you just had when the initial introduction, and think about the issue of racial profiling. A good portion of you all in this room would probably be guilty of racial profiling. Think about what we're trying to do with our police officers on the street and training them to avoid that slippery road. I work for a fantastic community on Buford Highway, which is the international corridor of our great city of Atlanta. I was honored to work with the Atlanta Police Department for 7.5 wonderful years. Some great friends and brothers and sisters in law enforcement. And I've been privileged to lead a great agency, a small little agency in the middle of the international corridor of the Metro Atlanta. English is always a second language in Doraville. I will tell you, 79% foreign-born on the Buford Highway corridor. My officers have to deal with this dynamic every day. We talk a great deal about the loftiness of the federal responsibility and the state responsibility on dealing with the immigration dialogue. But I'll tell you, the rubber meets the road at the municipal and local level. Our taxpayers will, and that's some of the things that I will talk to you all about, is that our taxpayers, the city of Doraville taxpayers who are struggling every day to make the bills, are going to be paying for the lack of action in Washington, D.C. They will be having to pay on additional police officers, additional jail space. And I will tell you that most chiefs of police, we deal on the management of very limited resources. Where do I apply my resources as a chief of police? And it's got to be the safeguard of life and property. That has to be where we put our resources. I'm afraid that the lack of progress in this issue at the federal level is detracting from our focus of protecting life and property. And that I see as a great danger. We have had a great deal of effort spent on professionalizing our police officers through training, through hiring and selecting the right people to have this great responsibility of carrying a badge and gun. And I am reluctant to go back to the days where racial profiling was okay. And I don't see how we're going to be able to deal with this, especially, House Bill 87. It's going to be a very, very difficult law to apply on the streets of my community. So those are the challenges we're facing. Unfortunately, once the Supreme Court deals with this law, as a chief of police, I don't have an opt-out clause. I have to enforce it, whether I like it or not. And this is my opportunity to speak and have the community especially the people in this room, there's some great influential folks in this room, we have an opportunity to say, hey, wait a second. Because once it gets passed with the Supreme Court, my options are done. I have to enforce the law, whether I like it or not. You don't want chiefs of police, you don't want police officers choosing and picking what laws we're going to enforce and which ones we're not. We are a nation of laws after all.
All right, Chief, in fact, I'm going to kind of take your lead on that. But first, I do want to recognize, a colleague of mine, former colleague, and my mentor in the Attorney General. When I became Attorney General, I met Thurgood Baker, who was the Georgia Attorney General, served 3 terms, was it, General Baker? He's here today. We'll just give a hand to my friend Thurgood Baker. It was great service. Always an example to me as Attorney General of putting people first and always in public service. Okay, so Chief King, you're talking about resources and so forth. Let me just back up. You know, in Utah, several years ago when Senate 1070 passed down there, the enforcement-only provision, Utah was then on a headlong rush to do the same. We in law enforcement got very, very concerned. Now, we understand people who coming to us saying, well, they're mad at the federal government. They don't feel like either Congress is doing their job to do comprehensive immigration reform, fix the problem. They're concerned that the federal government didn't have the resources to adequately enforce and secure the borders. And so their concept then, as they see the importance of the rule of law, is if they're not going to do it, then you at the state commissioner need to do it, or you at the local level chief, then you should be doing it. And so we have these 1070s type laws or 87 pass. What is the concern with local law enforcement or state law enforcement with being required to pick up and do what is basically a federal job and become, in effect, de facto ICE agents? Either one, whichever one you go first.
I will tell you, we have very limited resources. I have to prioritize every day. My supervisors have to prioritize. You get multiple 911 calls. A supervisor has to choose which call gets answered first. Life, property, and I will tell you that logically, and immigration enforcement, it's going to come a very distant third. It has to be. I have a responsibility to protect my entire community, not just some sectors of my community, but the whole community. That is what my oath of office requires. This gets in the way and it clouds the issues of priorities, and it's a typical. I attribute a great deal of wisdom to my old sergeant major. Command sergeant majors are great, parts of military organizations. They're the crusty guy who's the conscience of a military unit. When everything is a priority, nothing is. And that's what this law does.
And I'll just simply add that, and the chief said it right, every day a chief is tasked, one, with the budget and utilizing his personnel properly. The number one thing in a municipality, the number one thing that we must do is answer calls for service. We've got to answer that call. I mean, you can have the helicopters, you can have the SWAT teams, you can have all the things you want, but you must answer the calls for service. And something like this right here could really hinder every department, cause us so much grief, we can't respond. And again, as the chief said, it's a matter of serving the public. We are responsible for public safety, first and foremost. That is our job, and to have the officers available to do that. And when you're talking about prioritizing everything, something's got to give. Something's going to give. And that doesn't even get into the cost factor, Chief, that you mentioned, the jails, the overcrowding, that the taxpayers are going to pay for.
When you say that ultimately responsible for public safety, there are a number of questions here dealing with the fact that there are undocumented aliens in this country who are heavily involved in very serious crimes, from human trafficking and drug trafficking, ID theft, and on and on. And both of you, obviously, in your careers have dealt with strike forces and so forth dealing with this. But as far as the ultimate goal of protecting the public, what role do otherwise law-abiding undocumented aliens play in as far as becoming confidential informants, informing police, working with law enforcement, so together you can go after the worst of the worst? And if that is something that we do work with, and I know we do in Utah in our strike force, most of our confidential informants on our criminal alien strike force are otherwise undocumented aliens. What does it do to you in your effort to then work with them to protect the public at large?
I could probably discuss that, but I would tell you, if I could take a second to kind of step back, it goes back to even just basic answering of calls. my officers are now almost having to spend an enormous amount of time convincing victims of crime to cooperate with law enforcement, to give us information so we can go after the criminal element in those communities because of the fear factor as a result of some of these current laws that are being discussed. Without, a lot of people will, have knowledge of the 287G program, which is the ICE program that helps local law enforcement participate with federal agencies to provide enforcement action against undocumented aliens. I use 287G as a surgical instrument. I use it as a surgical instrument to go and remove the cancer from the community. That criminal alien that gets arrested for a felony, who is the cancer in the community, and I use that federal law to get a solid state conviction for a felony, then I remove him using 287G. That was the proper use of that law. That was the reason that law was designed, to empower state and local agencies to cooperate with federal law enforcement agencies. Unfortunately, that law has now been hijacked and is being used to just pick up people left and right. And that has complicated my relationship with the community that I'm sworn to protect. It is making it difficult for me to go and enforce the law and go and protect the community. Additionally, it has made it a ideal for predators to go and look at a segment of my community, especially young Latinos who carry large amounts of cash in their pockets, and we're afraid to put money in their banks. They're afraid of being deported, being arrested, and so what predators are doing, they're having it they have an ideal hunting ground for victims, because now they have a victim who has large amounts of money, cash, and we're unwilling to call and cooperate with law enforcement. If you're a criminal element, that is a perfect victim. And I know that the legislature did not intend that to happen, but that is the reality that we're facing every day on the streets.
And the chief and I were talking last night, and when I was telling John, one of the things, when I was speaking with Lynn also, one of the things that happened in Memphis when I was the police director down there, the robberies, the crime numbers that we were trying to get down were escalating so much due to the robberies in the Hispanic community. And we kind of tried to get out of the box a little bit. We created, I came up with a HEART team, which was a Hispanic Action Response Team. It was made up of covert officers from the organized crime unit who were either Latino, bilingual, went out into the community there, met with them, gained confidence. We wanted trust. They didn't trust us. They didn't want to tell us anything. And without that information sharing, without getting that, because, as you well know, the criminals don't really have a boundary. They don't really care who they take the money from. It can be you if you're the easy prey today, or it can be the Hispanic community or the Korean community or the Russian community. It can be a combination of all of them. But the problem was we were not getting the information. I will tell you, we had a Latino liaison in my office. We also had the HEART team. And over a 3-4 week period, we had an 87% reduction in crime in the Hispanic community because we started getting information. Now, let me tell you, it didn't stop there, because what the officers had to do when we had a victim, we stayed with that victim, because what happens next is they don't want to testify. You make the arrest, but then all of a sudden they don't want to testify. We stayed with them. We reassured them. We had a pretty darn good team at the time that could really reach out. And quite frankly, I made many meetings in the Hispanic community, and it would be in a grocery store. It would be a large group, and they wanted to be reassured by the police chief that, hey, if we come to you, are you going to arrest us? No. And you're talking about the 287G. Now, we didn't partner as much in Memphis. We would assist ICE on certain things, but they were convicted. They were felons. There were warrants, things of that nature. Right now with the Tennessee Highway Patrol, yes, we partnered. We've sent some troopers for the training, and we're using it as the chief described. The last thing we want to do is create some sort of fear that we're going to make every stop and start arresting and calling ICE. They're not going to come out anyway on every single thing. But felons, warrants, yes, we want to remove those individuals because they are playing havoc on all our citizens, all in the community. But again, we have a responsibility to all citizens in the community, and it doesn't make a difference of their ethnic background. It's a matter of not letting them be a victim.
There's a question here from somebody in the audience about 287G, and you both mentioned that there have been allegations of some abuses, racial profiling going on. There's also quite a bit of criticism with regard to Secure Communities, the federal program, in working with local law enforcement. And they say, why not just take those powers away from the federal government? I don't know if you want to opine on that. I know that you work daily with federal officers and so forth, but your thoughts on that?
I will tell you that we've been successful in applying 287G in the way it was designed. It was not ICE, and I have a good relationship with Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. I have to have a positive relationship with all federal partners, because without their assistance, clearly, when they passed the House Bill 87, $0 came to the city of Doraville from the state to enforce this. $0 have come from the federal government to enforce this. It is on the backs of our taxpayers in my city to if we have to start applying this law. So we've been successful because we're applying the law the way it was designed, not using it as a casting a wide net to go and catch people that drive with no license or such. It is a great tool to remove felons, dangerous criminals out of our communities. It gives us an additional tool, and I think that was the reason it was designed that way. I've spoken to ICE agents and the special agent in charge here in Atlanta, and they do not want to change that relationship. Clearly, they're overwhelmed. There's 90,000 beds available, I believe, in the nation to remove aliens. Well, my proposition is remove the criminal aliens who are affecting the Latino community. Use those beds to prioritize. Again, the word prioritize is a key to this. Is prioritize and removing the felons and the dangerous felons out of our communities so we all can thrive.
You mentioned that we're all talking about police resources right now and the impact these laws will have on prioritization and so forth, and having maybe the states tell us how to prioritize your resources, but it goes beyond that. You mentioned correctional facilities. Now, in Utah, under our proposed law, and everything, of course, is on hold right now, pending a Supreme Court decision here later this month on the Arizona law. But if it does go into effect, is it HB 87
yes.
here? Are your officers to transport them to a federal facility or to a county facility? Are they held there until the feds come get them? Are they released after that? How much time does it take for your officer to take them off the street and transport them? So forth.
I will tell you, if I picked up a busload of people that are not documented on Beaufort Highway and I drove them to the federal facility, I would be waiting there an incredible long time. There's nobody going to open the door. And there's also the process, the legal process, the holding process of having a warrant or having, there's a legal process for everything. We can hold somebody, 48 hours. And a magistrate judge has to review that decision to whether to see probable cause. The authority right now is suspect on being able to hold somebody, for example, for driving with no license, and they get taken into custody, and they are ready to make bond, and a magistrate sets bond. The authority to hold somebody beyond that is suspect. Again, the state or the federal government is not paying for the room and board. If you want to look at it in the most basic terms, the room and board of somebody being kept in custody in our jail facility or in the county facility, it's not reimbursable. The taxpayers of my community are having to pay for that decision, and also have to pay for the liability of that person being held in custody without a legal warrant. Chiefs of police are supposed to be type A personalities and supposed to be aggressive, but I don't know if I'm that aggressive. I'm not willing to gamble with the taxpayers' money in Doraville to hold somebody beyond 48 hours without a warrant.
Commissioner Godwin, if a law were passed in Tennessee like this that require, for example, a reasonable suspicion on a traffic stop on the highway by one of your troopers, and they have to determine on the side of the freeway, take the time, determine status based on reasonable suspicion or something, and then transport them to a facility. What does that do to the overall mission of the Highway Patrol? Or state?
Well, we're spread so thin across the state. Each trooper, they're covering about a 50-mile radius of what to cover, the different counties that they have to go into. And you're talking about, because that particular trooper will have to do all the paperwork, he will have to make the contact, and I'm talking about a felony or a warrant or something along those lines where we actually transport, and they're going to be tied up all evening. And it's one of the things that's just part of this. And so when you remove that individual, you've really taken away the manpower for the things that we need to be doing. But we do see it all the way through in those particular cases. So if you got into every stop and you got into the misdemeanors and you got into all these other things, we would have a real problem.
Now, we've heard a lot, obviously, about impacts of these types of laws on law enforcement, public safety. There's a question about what do you see maybe as a way forward on immigration reform and the role of law enforcement as part of that comprehensive reform?
This has been a tough. This is very heavily debated among chiefs of police in Georgia, because we are at the tip of the spear from our communities. They are complaining. For example, day laborers is a big topic of conversation in our communities. And the issues in the old days, it was probably easy to isolate. Oh, it was just Latino workers on the side of the road. But now with the state of our economy, it's not just Latinos standing on the side of the road looking for work. It is every segment in every component of our communities. How does a police officer distinguish who to pick up and what not to, and who not to pick up? That to me is a very dangerous ground. Without the right training, without the right, it's a process. Again, it's a very slippery road to go down racial profiling. And I'm nervous about it. As the chief of police, that I'm responsible for what my officers do. I want to give them the tools to be able to be successful, to solve problems in my community. Recently, I got a couple of folks in my community were complaining about day laborers. And they did not like my answer. But chiefs of police are trained to give answers that people don't like to hear. Day laborers, my attitude is that we deal with it like street-level prostitution. Not only do you go after the prostitutes, but you go after the Johns too. And then people start saying, whoa, wait a second. That means you're going to be locking up Grandma Jones when she's going to pick up the guys to go help her cut the grass and rake the leaves. Maybe that's not such a great idea. And that is what I am attempting to do, is for people to pause, to think through. It's easy to say, and we learned this in counterinsurgency training, both in operations, both in Afghanistan and Iraq. It is easy to hate a stranger. It is easy to hate somebody that doesn't look like you. But I tell you, when you sit down and break bread with somebody, and you sit down and talk to them, and you get to know their kids, and you get to go to the local schools and see how well they deal with each other, and that is what I am attempting to do. Is hey, let's put this on pause and let's talk about this. Because we got to be clear what the unintended consequences are, and I don't know if the unintended consequences are worth what we're trying to solve. Because I have some trepidation here.
I think Chief pretty much described everything that we would think of as chiefs, and one of the biggest concerns again is racial profiling. And where do you draw the line and to equip your officer and to train your officers in the right way? We talk about it at in-service training. We talk about the things that they should and shouldn't do. I know before I came here, I pulled the governor's latest information as far as what's been done on a national level, what hasn't been done. And I know he signed a bill which is sort of a phase in. But it doesn't tie our hands. It doesn't get us going out there and arresting individuals. Basically, what it does is it requires employers to e-verify. And I think somebody mentioned that earlier today. And I won't go into that a whole lot. But it's because there's nothing out there, and because the federal government has not laid something out for everybody to do that's the right thing across the board. So we're getting bits and pieces from everywhere, and fortunately for Tennessee, we haven't had one enacted like the chiefs described to me that's going to cause the issues that it can cause you.
We're getting close to finish. Let me ask two questions, kind of following up what you just said. We talked about racial profiling, but there will be those who argue that in many of these laws they've written that require, for example, if you have reasonable suspicion that that you're encountering is in the country illegally, but then they put in the next clause in the legislation, you cannot use racial profiling to determine that. So what do you use to determine if there's suspicion they're in the country illegally? Just like all of you,
so the ones that know me in this room have an unfair advantage. But the ones that do not know me and the assistant commissioner here kind of pause when you first saw us sit up here and you open the forum. That is what my police officers are having to deal with on every traffic stop. And we have a responsibility to give them more tools than to go out and figure it out. A good example that I use as a training for my police officers, and then I see our friends from Florida on the other side of the room, is how do we deal with the Canadian migration every winter going to Florida? And that ought to be the basis of how we deal. If it's good enough for our Canadian neighbors, it probably ought to be good enough as a basis on training and how to deal with people in our roadsides. And my biggest worry is the amount of resources it will suck away from our priority to respond to calls. So the state has not given us any tools on how to deal with this. It is easy to throw, in House Bill 87 has a number of provisions that are problematic. I mean, one, it says that we have a duty if we have probable cause, not only the driver, but all the passengers in the vehicle. Right. And then, and then also there's a special committee that will also determine if the chief law enforcement executives are applying this law appropriately. And if not, they can fine the chiefs $10,000 or, personally liable on these. So that is a good way to start the discussion of this in public. So that will cool the discussion. But it's tough. It is easier said. The law is clear, but the actual practical application on the side of the road in the middle of the night for a trooper or for a police officer trying to figure this out, we owe them better tools than that.
Chief, anything to add to that?
He said it best there at the end. The tools that we give them. I mean, when they make the stop, for them to determine everyone in that vehicle. And I was talking with the chief out there when I was the chief of Memphis. You have a violation. You deal with the individuals. It doesn't matter if they committed an act and you have a legitimate reason to make that stop. What did you stop them for? We don't care whether you're Hispanic. We don't care whether you're American. We don't care whether you're Italian. We're there to deal with it. But making sure that happens out there at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, you want to ensure that. And it's difficult. It really is for our officers.
Let me, looks like we have a couple more, but let me just kind of, last one. Let me go off this, though, that some of these laws have included in them a private right of action, so that if there's a citizen out there who feels like you or your officers are not asking enough questions, they could actually sue you or sue the agency. Now, you're both having former military backgrounds or current military backgrounds, law enforcement. What does that do to good order and discipline when, for example, Chief, you said immigration, this type of thing might be third or fourth down on a list of priorities. Let's say you have one officer out there who this is number one on his priority list, and he doesn't care that it's fourth or fifth in the department's priorities. By golly, he's going to do his job, or you're going to get sued. What does this type of thing do to good order and discipline?
There's a perfect description of an anarchy. It's about having our priorities. And, as a chief of police, my city council, my mayor gives me a list of priorities. What is the key, most important thing that they want the chief of police and that department to solve? And I would argue that very few mayors and councils and I would say governors, they would replace the protection of life and property above anything else. This clouds that priority list.
Maybe in wrapping up, then let me just say that I don't know. You've been around law enforcement a long time. I don't know if you remember the days when the goal of law enforcement was you tell everybody stay in your home and lock your door. We'll keep you safe. That now obviously changed to community-oriented policing, and that you're in the communities working with the people. That's the best way to to keep the public safe. Do you see a negative impact of these types of laws on your ability to do that? And leading into that, I remember once going through the Holocaust Museum in D.C. The former commissioner there of public safety in D.C. had a program called Where Were the Police?, where he asked law enforcement officers to go through. I don't know if you did this. And asked that question as progress is made from vilifying the people to exterminating the people. Where were the police and the lawyers and the judges in standing up and protecting those people? And how does that impact? And maybe just your final thoughts on the issue, both of you.
I went through the same program a couple years ago, and the thing that touched me the most is that there's a picture of a German police officer standing on the side at the railroad station, and he's standing there as people are being loaded onto train boxes. And I try to imagine, what was he thinking? What happened? And I will tell you, if I could go back in time and you asked, what were you thinking? He would have answered, I'm just enforcing the law. In knowing that morally, ethically, this was a problem. And that's one of the reasons I am so vocal and passionate about this issue. It's not just because I was born in Mexico. I love this country. I've traveled to parts of the world that you can't even imagine in my other uniform. I love my country. I protect it. I've commanded young men and women who suffered a lot of casualties. And this war that we've been fighting for over 10 years has taken its toll, especially with our young men and women here in Georgia. And I like to think that we're a better country than this. This is not something that I'm incredibly proud of. And I know that we're trying to solve a problem, but I don't know if we're creating a whole new set of problems where we start going down this slippery road. I don't want to be that German police officer standing on the side of a railroad station as we're loading up a bunch of people in boxcars. I just don't want to be that person.
Commissioner? Thank you. Commissioner, any closing remarks?
I actually I was at the Holocaust Museum, and basically the same thing, and how it initially came in, and no doubt the laws changed. And at first it was to build trust, and you could see, and you might remember this one, John, you had a German soldier with German shepherd walking down the street, and the citizens right there walking side by side with them, the Jewish families walking side by side, and then the next thing you know, they were being loaded up and treated the way they were. And again, I was doing my job, following the law, doing what I was told to do, and that's a very sad thing to think about. But I believe that's exactly what happened.
Let me just say that I attended a funeral. I mentioned funerals. Last year we had a deputy, Franco Aguilar, who was killed in line of duty, one of our rural counties. It was a Catholic Mass. His father got up in his very halting, English. He said, "My son loves this country. He gave his life to protect you." He said, "There was a time when we were welcomed here. And why you don't welcome us anymore? My son died because he loves serving this country and the state and the county." There is no small risk to law enforcement officers speaking up. I mean, you're all appointed by usually elected officials, politicians, so forth, and they hear from the public sometimes. I know Chief Burbank, you probably know Chief Burbank, Chris Burbank out in Salt Lake, and under fire for speaking up like you do. But I really appreciate you stepping forward today publicly, along with our members of faith-based communities and our free market people, our industry and commerce and agriculture, saying we need to do something about this jointly for the good of this country. And so thank you. God bless you. Thank you for your service. And thank you very much for being here today. All in your honor.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'd like you to do one thing before we close for the day. We've heard some incredible, we've had some incredible moments, had some incredible conversations. I want us to just be quiet for 1 second and think of one word that would sum up today. Just think about that one word. Okay. Now take just another second and turn to your right and tell that person what the word is. So my word, the word that I thought about as I was listening to the Attorney General and this amazing final panel was inspired. Inspired. Because not only just this panel or the previous panels, but because of everybody in this room. When we first started to think about this summit earlier this year, it was coming off the heels of the event that we did in Utah. And many people said, oh, it's the Southeast. It's tough down there. They speak with an accent. That much is true, but it hasn't been tough at all. And just the fact that, over 150 leaders from the business community, from the faith community, from the law enforcement community, came to Atlanta for one day to discuss the need for a new consensus on immigrants in America is inspiring. And I just want to thank you. And this is not work that started today. It's not work that's ending today. The Utah Compact in many ways launched this in November 2010. Then Indiana followed with an Indiana Compact, then an Iowa Compact, then the Mountain West Summit. Tomorrow is going to be an incredible event led by Dr. Land and many of his colleagues within the evangelical community, where over 140 evangelical leaders in this nation are going to sign a statement of principles describing the biblical underpinning for the need for immigration reform. So you think we made news today? Wait until tomorrow. And somebody asked me earlier today, and in fact it was Mayor Bridges, a little tired now. He says, well, why do you let everybody else speak? I said, because this isn't about the advocate. I'm a talking head. This is about everybody in this room, because you can speak to your audience, your constituency, your community better than anybody else. And the way we've come to think about this is that, how we're going to win immigration reform? Who's going to win it for us? It's the Bibles, the badges, and the business. Because voters, at the end of the day, they look to their pastor for guidance. Voters, at the end of the day, look to their police chief for guidance. And voters, at the end of the day, look to their small business owner for guidance. And that's the power of this room. So while today was the first ever summit in the Southeast on immigration and to talk about the need for immigration reform, I really think that today is the beginning of the first ever Southeast Coalition for immigration reform. Because the work doesn't end today. The work keeps going and going and going, because we know in the next few weeks the Supreme Court is going to issue their ruling. And regardless of what that ruling says, we know that whether it's Georgia, Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, Alabama, or Florida, we're going to have to double down and work harder than ever to make sure that our businesses, our communities, our neighbors are safe and they're prosperous, and they aren't harmed by state legislatures looking to replicate any of these terrible laws. And we're going to have to double down on our pressure on members of Congress so that they return to Washington, D.C., whether it's this year or next, and say, we want immigration reform. So for us as the National Immigration Forum, we are, again, very thankful. And I want to thank the staff of the forum, and if I would ask you to join me in a round of applause for the staff. Raise your hand. I ask you to join me in a round of applause because they're going to be working really hard from here on out. We're going to be doing compacts across the country. In Colorado, they're moving one already. There are conversations in other states. We're going to plan another one of these summits in the Midwest later this year. And you know what's going to happen in December? All of us in this room, all of us in the Mountain West, the Midwest are going to come to D.C. And we're going to tell Washington, D.C. in December of this year that regardless of who's in power in 2013, there is a new consensus on immigrants in America. And we will demand the administration coming into the White House or remaining in the White House, the Congress coming in January, that they represent that consensus. So that at the end of the day, every American and their family prospers from a functioning immigration system. So again, thank you. I'm sure we will see you again soon, and we even ended early. Take care.